There is a version of you that cannot be broken, not by loss, not by betrayal, not by the collapse of everything you thought you could count on. That version of you already exists, buried under noise, distraction, and the constant hunger for things to be different than they are. The old Stoics didn't discover happiness by getting more. They discovered it by needing less, thinking differently, and training the mind the way a soldier trains the body. Today, you're going to learn the 7 habits they use to build a happiness that doesn't rely on circumstances, a happiness that survives bad news, difficult people, and even the ending of everything you love. Stay until the end, because habit number 4 is the one most people get completely backwards, and it might be the reason you've felt stuck for years. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the home for anyone who wants to think clearly, feel steady, and live with quiet strength in a world built to keep you anxious. If you're new here, this channel exists to take the 2,000-year-old philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca and turn it into something you can actually use, not museum wisdom, but daily armor. If that sounds like something you need, consider subscribing, because we release videos designed to rebuild your inner world, one principle at a time. Now let's get into it. Picture 2 men standing in the same storm. One of them is a Roman emperor. He has armies, wealth, palaces, and the kind of power that could crush entire nations with a single decree. The other is a former slave, a man who spent years in chains, whose leg was permanently broken by a master who enjoyed hurting him for sport. On paper, these are the 2 most different lives imaginable. And yet both of them describe in their own writing the exact same inner state. A calm that doesn't ask permission from the outside world. A peace that doesn't check the news before deciding how to feel. A quiet, unshakable steadiness that neither wealth nor suffering could touch. The emperor was Marcus Aurelius. The former slave was Epictetus. And what connected them wasn't luck, and it wasn't temperament. It was a set of habits, deliberate, repeatable, almost mechanical practices that they performed daily, the way you'd brush your teeth or tie your shoes. Habits of the mind. Here's the uncomfortable truth most self-help content won't tell you. Happiness that depends on your circumstances being good is not real happiness. It's a loan, and loans get called in. Your health will fluctuate. People you love will disappoint you, or leave, or die. Your career will have seasons of triumph and seasons of humiliation. If your peace is parked in any of those things, you are, whether you realize it or not, living on borrowed time. The Stoics understood this 2,000 years before modern psychology caught up to it. And they built something different. Not a philosophy of denial, not a philosophy of suppressing emotion, but a philosophy of foundations, a way of constructing an inner life so solid that the storms outside become background noise. So here's what we're doing today. I'm walking you through 7 specific habits, practiced daily by the Stoics, that together form what Marcus Aurelius called the inner citadel, not a metaphor, an actual, practical fortress you build brick by brick, through repetition, through discomfort, through the deliberate rewiring of how you respond to the world. Some of these will feel intuitive. Some will feel almost backwards from everything modern culture has taught you about chasing happiness. That's exactly the point, because chasing happiness is precisely what keeps it out of reach. Let's start with the first one, and it's the one that separates people who merely read philosophy from people who actually transform through it. Before we go further, if you've ever felt like your mood is a hostage to your circumstances, drop a comment with "storm" so I know how many of you are here for this. It helps me know what to make next, and it tells me you're paying attention. Now, habit number 1. Habit 1, the daily practice of the dichotomy of control. Epictetus opened his entire philosophical system with a single sentence that, if you actually absorbed it, would change the rest of your life. Some things are within our power, and some are not. That's it. That's the seed from which everything else grows. Our opinions, our impulses, our desires, our aversions, in short, everything that is our own doing, These are within our power. Our body, our property, our reputation, our position, these are not within our power, because they depend on forces outside us. Most people spend their entire lives investing emotional energy into the second category and almost none into the first. Think about what actually ruins a normal day for the average person. Traffic, a rude comment from a coworker, a flight delay, someone's opinion of them on social media, the weather ruining outdoor plans. Every single one of these things sits firmly in the category of not within our power, and yet we hand over our peace to them constantly as if we had a contract obligating us to suffer whenever the external world doesn't cooperate. Epictetus taught something radical for his time and honestly still radical for ours. You are not disturbed by events, but by your judgments about events. The traffic doesn't make you angry. Your belief that you should already be somewhere else, that this delay is an intolerable violation of how things should go, that's what makes you angry. Strip away the judgment, and the traffic is just cars moving slowly, exactly as cars sometimes do. Here's how the Stoics actually practice this, and this is the habit part, not just the philosophy part. Every single day, usually in the morning, they ran what we might now call a control audit. Before starting the day's activities, they mentally sorted the day ahead into 2 columns. Column 1, what is up to me, my effort, my honesty, my reactions, my choices, my discipline. Column 2, what is not up to me, the outcome of the meeting, whether the client says yes, whether the rain ruins the trip, whether people like what I create, and critically, they trained themselves to invest energy only in column 1. Not because column 2 doesn't matter, but because worrying about column 2 produces nothing except suffering. You can prepare thoroughly for a job interview. That's column 1. Whether they hire you is column 2. You can speak to your partner with honesty and patience. That's column 1. Whether they respond well in that exact moment is column 2. Let me give you a modern picture of this. Imagine a small business owner who spent 18 months building a product she believed in. She researched the market, refined the design, priced it carefully, and marketed it as best she could. Then a competitor undercut her with an inferior product and captured most of the market anyway. In the old way of thinking, this is catastrophic. Years of effort, wasted. In the Stoic frame, something different is true. Her effort, her integrity, her craftsmanship, all of that was hers, fully within her control, and none of it was wasted. Because the doing of it was the point, not merely the outcome. The market's response was never hers to command in the first place. This is not passivity. This is not don't try. The Stoics were some of the most active, engaged, high-performing people in history. Marcus Aurelius ran an empire during a plague and a war simultaneously. The dichotomy of control isn't an excuse to stop caring. It's a redirection of where your emotional stake actually lives. You pour everything into your effort and your character, and you hold the outcome loosely, like sand that was never meant to be gripped tightly in the first place. Try this, starting tonight. Before bed, write down one thing today that upset you. Then ask honestly, was that thing within your control, or was it your judgment about the thing? 9 times out of 10, you'll find the disturbance came from the judgment, not the event itself. That single nightly audit, repeated for 30 days, begins to physically rewire how quickly your mind reaches for blame versus how quickly it reaches for acceptance and redirected action. If you're taking notes, that's habit 1. And if this is landing for you, hit the like button right now, because it genuinely helps this video reach someone else who needs to hear it today. Let's move to habit 2, and this one is about something the Stoics practiced that sounds morbid at first, until you understand why it made them some of the most grateful people who ever lived. Habit 2. Memento mori, the daily meditation on death. Roman generals, when they returned from a great victory, would parade through the streets of Rome to thunderous applause. And behind the general, in the chariot, stood a servant whose entire job was to lean toward his ear and repeat one phrase, over and over throughout the procession, Memento mori, remember you will die. at the peak of glory. The loudest applause a human being could receive in the ancient world, someone was whispering, a reminder of mortality, directly into the winner's ear. This wasn't cruelty, it was medicine. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man alive, wrote reminders to himself constantly about the shortness of life. The fact that you could leave life right now, and that this fact should determine what you do, say, and think. This was not depressing to him. It was clarifying. It cut through trivial anxieties like a blade cuts through fog. Here's why this becomes a happiness habit rather than a morbid obsession. Contemplating death regularly does something almost paradoxical to the mind. It makes the present moment unbearably vivid. Psychologists today call this phenomenon terror management, but they've also found something the Stoics knew intuitively. When handled correctly, awareness of mortality increases gratitude, increases present moment focus, and decreases the grip of trivial anxieties. Think about the last time you almost lost someone. Maybe a health scare, a car that swerved and nearly hit you, a call at 2 a.m. that turned out to be nothing. In that window of fear, before you knew the outcome, how much did you care about the argument you'd had earlier that week? How much did the criticism from your boss matter? It evaporated instantly, replaced by a sudden, overwhelming clarity about what actually mattered. The people, the time, the fact of being alive at all. The Stoics asked, why does it take a near-death experience to access that clarity? Why not build a practice that gives you that gift every single day, without needing the fear? Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius constantly about this, urging him to treat each day as if it might be complete in itself, not because tomorrow definitely won't come, but because building your happiness on the assumption of endless tomorrows is exactly what makes people waste today. He said that people are frugal with money but reckless with time, guarding their property but throwing away the one truly irreplaceable resource they have. Here's the actual daily practice, and I want you to consider genuinely adopting this. Each morning, spend 60 seconds, just 60, consciously acknowledging that this day is not guaranteed, that this could, statistically and honestly, be your last one. Not to frighten yourself, but to ask, given that, what do I actually want to prioritize today? Who do I want to speak to with more patience? What grudge is genuinely not worth carrying into a day I'm not promised? There's a version of this practiced even more specifically. Some Stoic-influenced traditions recommend picturing your own funeral. Who would be there? What would they say? What would you wish you had done differently? This isn't gloomy theater. It's a diagnostic tool. It shows you with brutal clarity the gap between the life you're currently living on autopilot and the life you'd actually choose if you remembered consistently that your time is finite. Consider a man in his final year of life, told by doctors he has months left. Almost universally, the things such people report caring about are shockingly simple. Time with family, unresolved relationships mended, small pleasures finally noticed. Almost never do people, on their deathbed, say they wished they'd cared more about a heated email, a rude stranger, or a minor professional slight. Memento mori is simply the practice of accessing that deathbed clarity now, while you still have decades to act on it, rather than waiting for a diagnosis to teach you what mattered all along. This is precisely why Stoic happiness is so durable. It doesn't depend on ignoring death, the single most certain fact of existence, but on integrating it so completely that trivial disturbances lose their power by comparison. When you've genuinely sat with the fact of your mortality, a delayed flight simply cannot compete for your emotional attention anymore. If this habit is hitting you differently than you expected, tell me in the comments. Has thinking about death ever made you feel more alive rather than more afraid? I read these, and honestly some of the most moving comments on this channel come from this exact question. Now, habit 3, and this is where we talk about something the Stoics did that looks, on the surface, like deliberately making yourself miserable. It isn't. It's the opposite. Habit 3, premeditatio malorum, rehearsing adversity. Seneca had a habit that if you told a modern wellness coach about it, they'd probably tell you to stop immediately. Before a journey, before a big meeting, before almost any significant event, he would deliberately imagine everything going wrong. The ship sinking, the money being stolen, the plan collapsing entirely. He called this rehearsal premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. This sounds like the opposite of positive thinking, and in a sense, it is. But here's what modern psychology has since confirmed, which the Stoics understood through pure observation 2,000 years earlier. Imagining negative outcomes in advance, calmly and deliberately, drains those outcomes of their power to ambush you later. Think about the difference between a soldier who has trained for combat and someone who has never held a weapon, both suddenly thrust into a dangerous situation. The soldier isn't happier about the danger, but the soldier isn't destroyed by it either, because their mind has already rehearsed this exact scenario 100 times in training. The surprise, the thing that truly breaks people, has been removed. What remains is simply execution of a plan. This is precisely what premeditatio malorum does for ordinary life. Before a difficult conversation, a Stoic would spend a few minutes imagining the worst version of it, the other person getting defensive, saying something hurtful, refusing to listen. Not to manifest that outcome and not to become anxious about it, but to sit with the emotional weight of that possibility in advance, calmly, so that if it actually happens, there's no shock. Just recognition. This is the scenario I already considered. I know how to stand in this. Here's an example that makes this vivid. Imagine someone about to give a major presentation to their company's leadership. The anxious version of preparation is avoidance, refusing to think about failure, hoping desperately that nothing goes wrong, and then being completely destabilized if a single slide malfunctions or a tough question lands badly. The Stoic version of preparation includes a specific mental rehearsal. What if the projector fails? What if someone in the room is openly hostile? What if I forget my main point halfway through? By rehearsing these scenarios calmly beforehand, the presenter builds something like emotional calluses, not because they expect the worst, but because they've already proven to themselves they can survive it. There's a crucial distinction the Stoics insisted on here, and it's the reason this habit doesn't create anxiety rather than resolving it. Premeditatio malorum is not the same as worrying. Worrying is passive, repetitive, and produces no resolution. The mind spins the same catastrophe over and over with no endpoint. Premeditation is active and bounded. You sit down, you deliberately walk through the difficult scenario once, fully to its conclusion. You note that you would, in fact, survive it and could respond to it, and then you close the exercise and move forward with clear eyes. It has a beginning and an end. Worry has neither. Marcus Aurelius did a version of this every single morning, famously writing that he would remind himself, before facing the day, that he would encounter meddling people, ungrateful people, arrogant people, dishonest people, and that this was simply the nature of the world he was walking into. Notice what this does. It doesn't make him bitter about people. It removes the element of betrayal and surprise from difficult interactions. When someone was indeed rude to him that day, his internal response wasn't, "How dare this happen to me?" It was, "Yes, I anticipated this exact kind of person existing in the world, and here they are right on schedule." This is enormously freeing, because so much of our unhappiness comes not from difficulty itself, but from our shocked, offended reaction to difficulty, set as if the universe had signed a contract promising us smooth sailing and then broken it. The Stoics refused to sign that imaginary contract in the first place. They expected friction, expected disappointment, expected occasional failure, and so when it arrived, it didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like Tuesday. Try this before your next genuinely stressful event, a hard conversation, a big deadline, a confrontation you've been avoiding. Spend 3 or 4 minutes, not lost in anxious spiraling, but in deliberate, calm rehearsal. Walk through the worst realistic version. Notice that you can, in fact, imagine surviving it. Then set it down and proceed. You'll find the actual event, however it unfolds, contains less power to destabilize you, because you've already been there once, in your mind on your own terms. Quick gut check before we continue. Which of these 3 habits so far do you think would be hardest for you personally to actually practice? Type it in the comments. 1 word is fine. I'm curious whether it's the control audit, the mortality practice, or this rehearsal habit that people resist the most. And it usually tells me a lot about what a person's actually struggling with underneath. Now let's talk about habit 4, and I promised you earlier this is the one most people get backwards. Habit 4, training desire inward, not outward. Here is where most modern self-improvement content and actual Stoicism sharply diverge, and it's worth slowing down here, because getting this wrong is exactly what keeps so many well-intentioned people stuck on a hedonic treadmill for their entire lives. Modern culture teaches that happiness comes from acquiring the right external things, the right income, the right relationship, the right body, the right recognition. Get enough of the right externals, the story goes, and happiness naturally follows. The Stoics tested this idea relentlessly against real human lives and concluded something uncomfortable. It's false and worse. It's a trap that guarantees perpetual dissatisfaction. Here's why. Externals, by definition, are things outside your control, and things outside your control are, by nature, unstable. Wealth can be lost. Beauty fades. Relationships change. Status shifts with the wind of public opinion. If your happiness is wired to any of these things, you have built your house on sand, no matter how expensive the house. So what did the Stoics do instead? They performed a specific redirection they called training desire inward. Instead of directing your wanting toward externals, more money, more approval, more possessions, you redirect the same energy, the same appetite for improvement, toward internal qualities that are entirely within your control: your integrity, your patience, your courage, your discipline, your capacity for honest self-reflection. This is the habit most people get backwards because it sounds at first like giving up ambition. It's the opposite. It's redirecting ambition toward the only target that can actually be hit reliably. You can absolutely fail to get the promotion no matter how hard you work. That outcome depends on other people's decisions, market conditions, timing, politics. But you cannot fail to become more disciplined if you actually practice discipline daily. You cannot fail to become more patient if you actually practice patience daily. These are the only forms of gain that are entirely 100% within your own hands. Epictetus put this almost mathematically. He said that if you want your children to live forever, you want something impossible, and you will make yourself miserable because you desire something not up to you. But if you want to act well with the situation you actually have, to be present, loving, patient with your children today, that desire can always be fulfilled, regardless of external outcomes, because it depends on nothing but your own will. Let's make this concrete with an example that most people will recognize. Consider someone who has decided their happiness depends on a specific promotion. Every day at work becomes an audition. Every interaction with their boss is filtered through the anxious question: does this help or hurt my chances? When a colleague gets recognized instead, it feels like a personal wound. This person has, without realizing it, handed the keys to their daily emotional state to their employer's opinion, something entirely outside their control. Now imagine the same person applying habit 4. They still want the promotion. Ambition isn't the problem, but their actual desire, the thing they're emotionally invested in, is redirected inward, to do excellent work regardless of who notices, to treat colleagues with genuine generosity regardless of competition, to grow their own skill because skill itself has value independent of recognition. If the promotion comes, wonderful, a bonus on top of a life already well lived. If it doesn't come, nothing essential has been lost, because the thing they actually wanted, to become more skilled, more disciplined, more generous, was achieved regardless. This is not resignation. This is the single most practical shift. available to anyone who feels like they're constantly at the mercy of outcomes they can't control. And here's the beautiful side effect the Stoics discovered. People who train their desire inward often end up achieving more externally too, precisely because they're no longer operating from anxious neediness. There's a certain magnetism to someone whose peace doesn't depend on your approval, and paradoxically, that quality tends to attract exactly the outcomes the anxious version of the same person was desperately chasing. The daily practice here is simple to describe, though it takes real repetition to internalize. At the start of each day, instead of asking, "What do I want to happen today?" ask, "Who do I want to be today?" regardless of what happens. Instead of, "I want this negotiation to go my way," ask, "I want to negotiate with total honesty and preparation, and I will consider that a full success regardless of their answer." This small linguistic and mental shift, repeated daily, slowly retrains where your emotional stake actually lives, moving it from the unpredictable outside world into the one place that's always entirely yours to command. This is genuinely one of the most life-changing shifts in the entire Stoic system, and if you've never heard it framed this way before, let me know in the comments. Has your happiness up until now been tied more to outcomes or to who you're becoming? Being honest with yourself about that answer is half the work. Let's move to something a little different now. Habit. 5 is about a discipline the Stoics practiced with language and thought itself, and it's more radical than it first appears. Habit 5, the discipline of ascent, guarding the gate of the mind. Imagine your mind as a fortress with a single gate. Every impression from the outside world, every event, every comment, every piece of news arrives at that gate and requests entry. The Stoics called the moment of deciding whether to let an impression in unchallenged ascent, and they treated the guarding of that gate as one of the most important disciplines a human being could develop. Here is the key insight. An impression itself is neutral. Someone insults you. That's an impression arriving at the gate. The insult itself carries no inherent emotional charge. What determines whether you suffer is whether you assent to the judgment riding along with that impression. The judgment that says, "This is an intolerable attack. I must be furious." If you examine that judgment before letting it in, you often find it isn't actually true, or at least isn't the only possible interpretation. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this constantly in his private journal, a journal he never intended anyone else to read, which is exactly why it's so honest. He would remind himself over and over that when someone wrongs him, the correct move is not to immediately assent to anger, but to pause and examine. Is this person acting from ignorance rather than malice? Is my anger actually going to improve the situation or just poison my own state of mind while accomplishing nothing? This is not suppression. This is a crucial distinction because a lot of people misunderstand Stoicism as "don't feel anything." That's not accurate at all. The Stoics fully acknowledged that a sudden jolt of anger, fear, or hurt would arise. Automatically, they even had a specific word for this involuntary first reaction. What they insisted on was that this first jolt is not you. It's a reflex, like flinching at a loud noise. The real discipline begins in the half-second after that reflex, in the choice of whether to feed it, believe it, and act on it, or to examine it and let it pass through without commanding your behavior. Here's a vivid way to picture this. Imagine you're driving and someone cuts you off aggressively. The jolt of anger is instant and automatic. That's just biology, and even the wisest Stoic would feel it. But then comes the gate. Do you assent to the thought, "This person deliberately disrespected me and deserves my rage," and spend the next 20 minutes fuming, tailgating, letting your entire mood curdle? Or do you examine the impression? Maybe they're rushing to a hospital. Maybe they're simply a bad driver having a bad day. Maybe this has genuinely nothing to do with you at all and will be irrelevant in 10 minutes regardless. That examination, brief, almost instantaneous once trained, is the discipline of assent in action. This habit compounds dramatically over time, because most human unhappiness isn't caused by single catastrophic events. It's caused by hundreds of small, unexamined assents given every single day. Assenting to the judgment that a slow email response means someone is upset with you. Assenting to the judgment that a friend's shorter than usual text means the friendship is fading. Assenting to the judgment that a single mistake at work proves you're incompetent. Each of these judgments, left unexamined, produces real emotional suffering, even though the underlying event was often neutral or ambiguous. The actual daily practice is a kind of mental pause and question habit. When you notice a strong emotional reaction rising, before acting on it, ask one simple question. What is the bare fact here, stripped of my interpretation? Someone didn't reply to a message. That's the fact. They're ignoring me because they're upset with me is the interpretation, and it's just one of dozens of equally plausible explanations. By training yourself to separate fact from interpretation, even just partially, even just some of the time, you dramatically reduce how often you're suffering over things that may not even be true. This is precisely why Stoics could remain so calm under conditions that would destabilize most people. It wasn't that nothing affected them. It's that they had trained, through years of daily practice, a gap between impression and reaction, a gap most people never develop, because they've never been taught it exists. That gap is where all of your actual freedom lives. Everything outside that gap is automatic. Everything inside it is entirely yours to shape. If you've made it this far, you're clearly serious about actually internalizing this, not just watching for entertainment. So let's keep building. 2 habits left, and honestly, these last 2 are what tie everything together into something you can sustain for the rest of your life. And quick reminder, if you want more videos like this, subscribing genuinely helps, because it tells YouTube to show this channel to more people who need exactly this kind of content in their lives. Habit 6. Viewing obstacles as the path itself. There's a phrase Marcus Aurelius wrote that has since become one of the most quoted lines in all of Stoic philosophy, and for good reason. It compresses an entire worldview into a single sentence. He wrote that the impediment to action advances action, and what stands in the way becomes the way. Let's sit with what this actually means, because it's easy to nod along with the quote without absorbing the practice behind it. Most people experience an obstacle as a detour from their real life, an unwanted interruption standing between them and the life they're actually supposed to be living. A health issue, a financial setback, a difficult boss, a cancelled plan. The instinct is to treat these as obstructions to be endured, until real life resumes on the other side. The Stoics rejected this framing entirely. They argued that the obstacle is not a detour from your path, it is the material your path is made of. There is no real life waiting behind the obstacle. The obstacle, engaged with skillfully, is the actual exercise your character needed. A difficult boss isn't standing between you and the practice of patience. Dealing well with that boss is the practice of patience. A financial setback isn't blocking your development of resourcefulness. Navigating it well is the resourcefulness. Think about fire and how it interacts with different materials. Thrown onto a small pile of kindling, fire consumes it and goes out. But thrown onto a large, well-built structure, fire doesn't destroy it. It becomes part of it, feeding the blaze and making it larger. Marcus Aurelius used exactly this image. A well-ordered mind treats every circumstance, even seemingly bad ones, as material to be absorbed and used for its own growth, the way a strong fire consumes any fuel thrown its way and simply burns brighter. This reframes obstacles from threats into raw material. It doesn't mean pretending obstacles feel good. They don't. And the Stoics never claimed otherwise. It means refusing to treat them as evidence that your life has gone off track. Your life is not happening somewhere else, waiting for the obstacle to clear. This, right now, including the obstacle, is your life. And the only question that matters is what quality of character you bring to meeting it. Here's a concrete illustration. Consider two people who both lose their jobs unexpectedly in the same week. The first spends months in a state of grievance, treating the job loss purely as an injustice, a pause button on the real life they were supposed to be living, waiting anxiously for things to return to how they were. The second, without denying the real difficulty and financial stress involved, treats the situation as the actual terrain. They now have to navigate skillfully an opportunity to practice resourcefulness, to reassess what they actually want from work, to develop resilience they didn't know they had. Neither person controls whether they lost their job, but one of them is actively building character through the event, while the other is simply enduring it, waiting for a real life that, in truth, never left. It just changed shape. This habit also quietly dismantles a huge amount of resentment. So much suffering comes from the sense that obstacles are personal insults from the universe. Why is this happening to me? The Stoic reframe removes the personal insult entirely. The obstacle isn't targeting you. It's simply the next piece of terrain, and terrain, by nature, is sometimes smooth and sometimes rocky. Treating rocky terrain as an offense is exhausting and pointless. Treating it as terrain to be crossed skillfully is empowering, because it puts the focus back on something you actually control, your own response and skill, rather than something you don't, which is whether the terrain was rocky in the first place. The daily practice for this habit is a specific reframing question. Use the moment something goes wrong, instead of asking, why is this happening? To me, ask, what does navigating this well actually require of me right now? That single substitution, replacing a victim question with a craftsmanship question, changes your entire relationship to difficulty. It stops being something done to you and becomes something you're actively working with, the way a sculptor works, with the grain of difficult wood rather than fighting against it. We're almost there. One habit left, and it's the one that quietly holds all the others together, because without it, everything we've covered so far can slide into cold detachment instead of genuine, warm happiness. Habit 7. Daily gratitude through the lens of impermanence. Here's something people often misunderstand about Stoicism, and it's worth correcting directly, because it changes how you should hear everything we've discussed so far. Stoicism is frequently caricatured as cold, emotionless, detached, as if the goal is to feel nothing at all. Nothing could be further from the actual philosophy. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca were, by their own writing, deeply affectionate men, capable of real warmth toward friends, family, and even strangers. The goal was never numbness. The goal was untangling genuine love and appreciation from anxious, desperate grasping. And the final habit is what makes that possible, a very specific form of daily gratitude, one built directly on top of the mortality practice from earlier in this video. The Stoics didn't practice generic gratitude. I'm thankful for my house, my job, my health, recited without much feeling. They practiced gratitude sharpened by an acute awareness of impermanence. This exact moment, this exact person in front of me, this exact conversation will not come again in this form. Given that, what does it deserve from me right now? This is a genuinely different quality of gratitude than the casual kind. Consider the difference between thinking, I'm grateful for my parents, as an abstract background fact, versus actually sitting across from a parent, fully aware that this specific conversation, on this specific evening, is not guaranteed to repeat, and letting that awareness sharpen your attention, your patience, your presence in that exact moment. The first is a pleasant thought. The second changes how you actually behave. Epictetus advised something remarkably practical here. When kissing your child goodnight, he said, remind yourself silently that this is a mortal being, and you are not promised tomorrow's goodnight kiss. He didn't intend this to produce anxiety. He intended it to produce presence, to stop you from going through the motion of a goodnight kiss on autopilot, distracted by your phone or your to-do list, and instead give that ordinary moment the attention it actually deserves, given how genuinely temporary it is. This is the thread that ties every habit in this video together. The control audit teaches you to stop wasting emotional energy on what isn't yours to command. The mortality meditation makes the present moment vivid. The rehearsal of adversity removes the shock from difficulty. Training desire inward moves your happiness onto solid ground. The discipline of ascent gives you a gap between event and reaction, viewing obstacles as the path turns difficulty into material for growth. And this final habit, gratitude sharpened by impermanence, makes sure all of that clarity gets pointed toward genuine appreciation rather than curdling into detachment or cynicism. Here's the actual daily practice. Each evening before sleep, bring to mind one person or one moment from that day. Something ordinary is fine. A conversation, a meal, a small kindness someone showed you. Then deliberately hold the thought. This exact version of today will never occur again. Not in a frightening way, but the way you'd hold a photograph you knew was the only copy in existence. Notice what that awareness does to your appreciation of the moment, even in memory. Practiced nightly, this single habit slowly recalibrates your entire nervous system away from taking things for granted and toward a kind of quiet, constant appreciation that doesn't depend on anything going especially well because it's rooted in the mere fact of having had the moment at all, not in the moment being perfect. This is the real destination of everything the Stoics practiced. Not indifference, not suppression. A happiness built from the inside, brick by brick, that doesn't ask the world's permission first. Let's bring this all together. Because these 7 habits are not 7 separate techniques. They're one integrated practice repeated daily that gradually builds the inner citadel Marcus Aurelius wrote about in his private journal, alone at night by candlelight, never intending a single word of it to be read by anyone else. He wasn't performing wisdom for an audience. He was rebuilding himself, one entry at a time, because he understood that character isn't a decision you make once, it's a structure you maintain daily, the way a fortress needs its walls checked, repaired and reinforced continuously, or it slowly crumbles. You don't need to be an emperor to build this. You don't need to be free of hardship, free of loss, free of difficult people. In fact, the entire philosophy assumes the opposite, that hardship, loss, and difficult people are simply the permanent weather of being alive. And the only real question is whether your inner structure is strong enough to stand. Regardless of what the weather does, start small. Pick one of these 7 habits, just one, and practice it deliberately for the next 7 days. Not all 7 at once. That's a recipe for abandoning all of them within a week. Choose the one that spoke to you most directly while watching this, and give it genuine, repeated attention. The Stoics didn't become steady overnight, and neither will you. But every single day, you practice any one of these 7 habits is a brick added to a structure that, over months and years, becomes genuinely unshakable. If this video gave you even one idea you're going to carry into tomorrow, that's exactly why this channel exists. Wisdom of the Stoics is built entirely around turning ancient philosophy into daily, usable practice, not abstract theory, but real tools for a real life that includes real difficulty. If you want more of this, subscribing is the single best way to make sure these videos keep finding you. And if you know someone who's been going through a hard season lately, this might be exactly the video to send them. Let me know in the comments which of these 7 habits you're starting with this week. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know where you're beginning this practice. And before you go, one last thought. Straight from Marcus Aurelius himself, something he wrote to no one but himself. On a night much like any other, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. I'll see you in the next one.